Mad and nuts, and I haven't had time to give the grocery store stuff.
Would you like some?
I might have a couple if you're offering.
Me a room. What I mean is, not move away, but give each other
Space.
Not that I
Space
need,
between the
yeah, I don't need us to.
get back.
Okay.
Mike? You want-
And Eric had to go make a phone call, but he'll be back.
He'll be back.
Early also.
See what happens. I'll give this to him. He'll read them.
Hello, friends.
Well, I'm in charge.
And 4 of our board members are curriculum board members. And 2 of them had to go take care of things, so we'll just give them a couple more minutes before we get started. One thing I'd like to mention, and for the press, if you could please take note of this, if you Google Newark Public Schools calendar, some old version tends to come up. And therefore, it incorrectly breaks out the February break. So I really want on the record for us to recognize that the February break includes the following days: Thursday the 14th, Friday the 15th, obviously the Saturday and Sunday, as well as the Monday the 18th. So it is a 5-day break. And that is for everybody. There's no PD. And this calendar that you Google, and we've tried to get it taken down, but for whatever reason, that's not possible. Welcome to the 21st century. That 14th is shown in some versions as a school day. So if the media could make sure to convey that, if the minutes could be sure to convey that, we don't want there to be any confusion. Thank you. Okay. I think we should get started. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll start off the meeting with public comments. Do we have anything? Brenda? Sorry. What is this?
Yeah, on those.
Joe.
It's
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just one speaker on the public comments list tonight, Joe Janzerkos. Please state your address for the record.
163 Chestnut Hill Road. Good evening. Thank you, Mike, for making that correction about the break. So thank you for that. But tonight I'm here to speak about the budget. Good evening, members of the Board of Education. Dr. Adamowski's budget is a very large and aggressive one. Many items contained within this budget are extremely costly. The expansion of the marine science pathway, the medical pathway, and the extension of the elementary school day have been well planned and ultimately needed reforms for Norwalk Public Schools. Overall, these enhancements and adjustments have been discussed and vetted before implementation. These changes have been discussed at various committee meetings and have sought public stakeholder input. Unfortunately, not all the items listed in this budget have received this level of review or consideration. Many costly items are proposed that have not even had public input or discussion of any of the details. The Montessori School, the School of Distinction, high school start times, NARAMEC's Rigor and Relevance Lab School, for example, are all things which have not been publicly discussed. These are guinea pig items that may or may not serve our students better and will cost a good deal. The strategic operating plan is not necessarily what everyone else thinks this district can afford. Excuse me. Montessori is tried and tested, but is it really needed? This is a huge cost for a preschool program. We have eliminated other NPS certified teachers and preschool programs. Does this city really plan to continue to fund the Montessori each and every year with a new grade? The NARAMEC lab means that all new teachers will spend a period of time teaching at NARAMEC. How does this impact those students and those teachers? This has yet to be fleshed out. The IB program at Brian McMahon seems to be a success, but the elementary proposal has had negative reaction from some community members. Is there any process or any chance to reconsider? The school of distinction model isn't here because it will start off with private funds, but then shift the cost to the district for a year-round school. It will certainly cost more, and the research is not supporting that it prevents a true summer slide. Our summer school programs had a positive impact on roughly half of the students who participated this past summer. Why does anyone think that a year-round school would do better? Bold and costly plans are often met with resistance and controversy, and this budget is no exception. The resistance stems from the past few years of disrespect and limited communication from central office. Plans are conceived and created behind closed doors without the proper and often required input. The NFT has repeatedly asked to be engaged and informed of the major decisions, not as a means of prevention, but rather to check, to make sure and ensure that the plans can be completed with fidelity. Dr. Adamowski and central office must come to the realization that the teachers of Norwalk are what breathe life into their plans. We shape, correct, and fill in the holes created by the strategic operating plan for the betterment of all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And if there are no other members of the public wishing to address the board, we'll close the public comments section. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The next step will be the superintendent's report. I will just mention that a number of those initiatives have been actually, Joe, discussed publicly, including the school distinction. We had a whole board meeting about it. In Montessori, we had a whole presentation about it I think we were at Brookside School. So some of those things, you know, they might not be the best ideas or not, but it's up to the board to make those decisions. That's what we're elected to do. Anyway, I'll turn to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 items on my report tonight, the last one being a surprise. So the first one is our January enrollment report. And I think you have that in front of you on these elongated pages. And the reason, as you know, the ones I generally report on publicly are the October 1st and the January. This time we are switching to a new format. And this was actually based on a suggestion from Mr. Barbas to provide income data, free lunch eligibility data, ethnicity, and ELL and special ed data. So I think you will see in this report that you get much, much more information than we've ever had before. And this is the format that we will use for the online monthly reports at this point. So I'm just going to walk you through this, and I'd like to highlight a couple of the things that are information that may not be generally known because they were they weren't explicit in the old format. So on page 1, which is that short data page, this is our preschool enrollment. As you know, preschool, as it is in every school district in the state, is carried out by school district partners. In our case, it's the Stepping Stones Children's Museum that runs the Ellie preschools at Tracy, Merrimack, Fox Run, and Brookside. And of course, Norwalk Early Childhood Center is listed separately, and those students who are in special ed and pre-K in other sites are also listed separately. The takeaway here is that at 259 students, we are providing about 1/3 of the preschool services to the 800-900 or so students that are served. Most of preschool is actually provided by the city, which has another 1/3, and then the remaining 1/3 to a variety of outside providers who serve on our early childhood council. If you go to page 2, this is grade level enrollment. Enrollment by grade level for each of our schools. And a couple of things to note here. Our largest grade cohort currently at over 1,000 students is in grade 9. This is followed by grade 10 and the 4th grade. After a couple of lower years, 1st and 2nd, our kindergarten enrollment is up again and projected to stay up in our enrollment projections for the next several years. We are still at 107% capacity, in need of 900 new elementary seats. What I think this report suggests, though, is that the middle schools are now at absolute full capacity. And, you know, we really cannot enroll any further middle school students. Having two K-8 schools will help that situation in various ways, but it's going to be a very full house at the middle school for the foreseeable future. Our largest school is Brian McMahon High School at 1,500, followed by Norwalk High School at 1,300. Ponus and West Rocks are both stretched to capacity at 680 students each. Our smallest schools are CGS, Center for Global Studies, and the Wolf Pit Elementary School.
So, Stephen, we should add the CGS numbers to the Brian McMahon numbers because they're all in the same complex, right?
Yes, but CGS is a separate school, and you'll notice that NECA is listed as a separate school here as well.
Got it.
Okay, so if you go to page 3, this is our special ed enrollment. Yvette Gorovich will comment a little further on this when you hear her report prior to the resolution to sunset the Special Ed Development Fund. The big picture here is that special ed enrollments have grown slightly at 14.6% of the population, approximately 15% where we think it will be next year and for the long term. There are schools such as West Rock and Tracy that have slightly higher special ed enrollments. And I think the other takeaway is the Norwalk Early Childhood Center is at 57%, which is exactly where it should be, right? Because we want the balance there, you know, 60-40, 50-50, 40-60 in the other direction between the typicals and special education students. The movement of the school readiness seats, 20 school readiness seats from Brookside to NECC has facilitated that balance being achieved as we thought it would. I would ask you to go to page 4.
May I ask a question?
Yep.
3?
Sure.
What I found interesting is the differences in each school between female and males in special ed, and also in the fascinating to me in relation to what's going on in all of the schools. In our Norwalk 18 to 21 program, it's exactly alike. It's even. I know they're smaller numbers, and our out-of-district placement is also 100%. 100. I'm not sure what that means, but anyway, is this typical? And I'm sure there's been some studies about this.
100% simply means they're all special ed students.
Yeah, okay, that I guess that. But in each school, I don't see a single school. Well, first of all, the differences are rather large, and the pattern is considerably more males than females. Why I bring this up, when I first joined the Board of Ed in 2005, the state had intervened and was monitoring our special ed program because there were just too many African American males in it. And I'm looking at some data that indicate that there are a lot more males than females in our special ed program, and I'm wondering what the reasons are.
So there are, this is a national trend. We are not unique in this. Nationally, there are more boys than girls referred in special ed and receiving special ed services. There are two theories on this. One is the developmental difference between boys and girls early in their school careers, which make boys less developmentally younger, more immature, they act out more, so on and so forth. And
I'm sorry to interrupt. That's not a rationale for moving someone to special ed.
No, I'm giving you the theory here, right? And so this is all historic. It's what, you know, referrals that teachers have made for a generation, for 12 years.
I know that.
So, you know, that's one theory, and another is that there is a male bias relative to male behavior that somehow, fits into the tendency to have more referrals. So this is consistent with state data. It's consistent with national data. Our latest review from the State Department did not show any racial over-identification, but this is typical for special ed. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it, we certainly would strive to be at a higher level of sophistication, but in order to be at a higher level of sophistication, there are a number of things that we would do. We would need to do developmental screening at kindergarten. We probably would need to have a step between kindergarten and first grade for students who were developmentally younger, and we would have to do some work, I think, with our staff relative to the gender bias issue and how to identify it.
And Connecticut should not allow 4-year-olds to enter kindergarten.
That's true.
There's another flip way of looking at it, that there could be more referrals of male students, but also that we could be under-referring female students because they don't cause a problem, and so they might be.
They tend to be quieter, they tend to mask their problems, yes. So this is the gender bias issue.
Stephen, can I ask one question? So with this data, one thing everyone I think should be aware of, and I'm not familiar with all of them, but I know we have self-contained classrooms at Tracy and Rowayton, which would suggest those schools would be slightly higher. Are there any self-contained classrooms in the middle school level? Well, I guess there's that program, the Success Program at Rowton.
Also at Ponus.
Okay. And what about West Rocks? No?
There is one at West
Okay.
Rocks.
I was just trying to see if that skewed the numbers a certain way because of that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, if you go to page 4, this is a lunch status enrollment. These are the students that qualified for free and reduced lunch, which is the proxy that is used for income. So the higher the free and reduced lunch percentage, the lower the income is for the school. So several things of note on this report. We are now at 57.4% free lunch eligibility, which is up from the previous year and up significantly over the 3-year period. So we have grown in terms of the number and percentage of low-income students being served by our schools. This is the highest participation so far that we've had in free and reduced lunch. You can see that there are some schools that are extremely high. Kendall at 79%, Brookside at 73%, Jefferson at 72.5%. And these schools certainly have that additional challenge of dealing with students who do not have, whose parents are not able to provide the supports that they would want and we would want. The lowest participation is at Cranberry at 34%. So this is very telling. You know, it essentially reflects what is happening in Connecticut in the school area, where the schools are becoming more diverse and poorer, reflecting the immigrant population that is enrolling in our state, and we are certainly not the exception to that. Any questions on this page?
Stephen, there used to be a big stink when I was first on the board, actually when I was a PTA president, about if the district became over 50% free and reduced lunch, then you'd be a Title I district. But that, it doesn't seem to be the case. I don't know, we must have been misled.
No, that was a misnomer for universal feeding. By the way, to qualify as a Title I school, you have to be over 50%. So that's true in that regard. But in terms of universal feeding, where you don't have to pass out the applications and everyone just gets a free lunch, you have to be at, I think it's 85% or greater.
Not 81.
So. Okay, the next page is, again, particularly important information for us. This is the ELL enrollment, our English language learners. So the ELL enrollment is up to 16% for the first time in history. It has now surpassed the special education enrollment for the first time in our recent history. And this is the fastest growing segment of our school population. You can see that this does vary school to school. Kendall, for example, has the highest population of ELLs at 36%. And, you know, I'd like you to reflect on that for a minute. That's a third of the school learning English for the first time. It makes their recent achievement in terms of their SBAC growth in reading and math even more significant under these circumstances. But certainly this is a challenge that we are going to need to meet as a district. You may be aware that compared to the other cities in the state, our ELLs do better than any other city. We've invested a lot of time and expertise in this area. We've had good leadership. We've had good teaching. But this becomes an overwhelming issue at some point. And it's something that we have to be very conscious of as we move forward.
This issue came up last year, and it's pertinent this year, especially around budget time. And we do use per pupil expenditures. We know differences of up to $5,000 between us and surrounding towns. Actually, in reality, the difference is even larger because of we have more special needs and L students in those towns, which require, by law, additional services that are often quite costly.
So the state tells us that it costs about a third more to educate a English language learner than a student who is not. And so that's the big residual cost here. Now, you remember last year's budget, I actually included, because we had gained about 200 new ELLs, I included a budget or enrollment adjustment for the ELLs, and we beefed up our services significantly at that time. We also have a syndrome in place where we get a lot of new students in January. So, you know, this is taken on January 2nd before that happens. But right now we are enrolling a good number of students. I'm told this is because the school year in many Central and South American countries ends at Christmas. And then, so if you're going to make the move for school purposes, at least psychologically, in the family's mind, you do it in January. The other thing I would highlight here is that these students represent some 16 countries culturally. And with the largest groups in the last 2 years, this year and last year, the overwhelmingly largest groups coming from Guatemala and Honduras. But again, this is a first for us to be at 16% English language learners, with some schools as high as a third of their populations.
But these students are not all Latino, right?
They are predominantly Latino. We have a few students who are not. Next, I think there's about a dozen students who are Haitian, who speak Haitian Creole, and I believe the next two groups after that is Polish and Greek. But again, you're talking about a handful of students compared to the hundreds represented in Spanish language.
Julie?
One question on this. How many years out are the students still identified as ELL? So I know it depends. Some states do it differently than others, I believe. So once a student is identified ELL, how are we still tracking their data even when they're no longer still requiring ELL classes?
Well, we track their data if they're receiving ELL services. So that is determined by the Lost Links testing, which is annual. And so if a student doesn't meet the threshold, they can get services for up to 5 years. Many students will meet the threshold in 2 years or 3 years. So again, that's a sign of an effective program. So most of our students are getting out of it in 2 or 3 years. So this is a relatively recent group of immigrants here.
Okay, thank you.
And so, you know, you're going to see on the next slide our Hispanic population, right? And you'll see that it is far larger than the number of ELLs, because we're fairly efficient in terms of our ability to teach English to the students who need it.
But Stephen, if a student comes in, is then identified as ELL, then is that kind of always in their record, so to speak? I mean, they
No,
always
you
go to
stop
the-
being an ELL when you pass the threshold on the last links.
On the,
Las Links is the name of the test. It's a statewide test that measures language dominance. And it's a minimum standard. So, you know, when you pass the Las Links, it's not that you're fluent in English, but it's that you know enough English that you can, you know, absorb the curriculum and you can learn the content material.
Eric?
Actually, I'll wait till we actually go over the ethnicity enrollments, because I jumped ahead while listening and started to have some interesting breakdown numbers.
Okay, well, we'll be back to you, Eric.
Fantastic, thank you, Mr. Barvis.
All right, so if you go to page 6, this is the ethnicity breakout. And again, very interesting. So the biggest takeaway here is that we are now at 49.4% Hispanic, and that is up significantly. 3 years ago, we were around 40%. I remember we were at 40% when I became superintendent. We've had significant growth each of the last 3 years. Predictably, in a year, we will be a majority Hispanic school district. In contrast to that, the Asian population has increased slightly. The black population has decreased significantly, and the white population has decreased slightly. And again, when you look at our Hispanic population, it's comprised culturally of 16 countries of origin, but most recently, the majority of students are from Honduras and Guatemala.
Eric?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Barvis. Fascinating numbers. One thing I'm curious about is you said that the black percentage numbers dropped dramatically. What is the comparison on that, Dr. Adamowski?
I think when I became superintendent, it was close to 25%.
If I remember when we did the study, the facility study, and they did a demographic study of the students, I can't remember the time frame, but I can't remember if it was a 5-year time frame or a 10-year time frame, but we had lost 500 black students and we had lost 500 white students, but the base of the white students was much larger, so percentage-wise, it wasn't that big a drop.
Right.
But black student-wise, African-American student, it was a huge drop percentage-wise.
So the two big drivers here are the birth rate and immigration. Okay,
Right.
so what you see driving this is a higher birth rate among Hispanics, lower birth rate among blacks and whites, and then also driving the Hispanic number is immigration.
Right, and I think just as we start to navigate in that topic of discussion, it's one that can definitely get a bit heated in the public narrative. I did rough estimation of the ELL population, of the Hispanic population in our school, roughly only 30%, if I used your numbers from earlier, would be in that ELL. So that means we have roughly 70% of that large group.
That's correct.
That is not in ELL services, but that means we have a massive population of students who are with us that speak English, that do not need those services, and really are representing in the makeup of the majority of our body. And as we move forward, as we've been presented in other situations by other members of the community, this is a big area to focus on representation and making sure that we continue to support all of these students on a number of different levels.
That's correct. That's correct. And again, that's the value in getting an enrollment report like this, is because you can see trends, right?
So, Dr. Adamowski, one question. Can you provide a little clarity on, I'm looking at the out-of-district placement, especially with the ethnicity breakdown, especially the gender. I'm also looking, one, at the gender comparison in the number of females versus males in out-of-district placement, and in addition, noting that of all of the students out-of-district placement, the majority then are coming from our Black and Latino Hispanic community?
I can't explain the out-of-district placements. As you know, you had a correct report 3 years ago that noted that we had an inordinate number, right? And it occurred for all kinds of reasons, and we actually had settlement agreements to schools that were not approved for special education. So I'm not sure there was a rhyme or reason to this, other than the good news is that many of these students are back with us now as a result of the effect of the Special Ed Development Fund, and many of the remaining students are aging out of these special placements.
I think this does go back to iterate some of the conversations we were having at the beginning about the special education population and looking at the differences between male and female, and digging in a bit deeper on not only identification, but what we're expecting of students, and all of that, especially starting at the early elementary years, and how we're expecting students to demonstrate academic and social emotional behaviors.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions on ethnicity?
Thank you for doing this.
So just one final comment. If you know that the state of Connecticut classifies as high-need students 3 groups of students: those that are low income, as measured by the free lunch proxy, English language learners, and special education students. So when we add those together, that gives us a whopping 63% of our students in the high needs category. So, you know, you're voting on a budget tonight, right? And I think you can see the challenges facing our schools, and also the equity issue that faces our schools when we have this many high-need students and a per pupil expenditure that is significantly below that of other comparable, of other neighboring districts, and in terms of Stanford, other comparable districts to us. And again, I think the trend is in the directions that you see here. And again, this is going to need to go into our planning. You know, do we need a second dual language school, for example, as raised by this issue? And you know, what about the balance of in certain schools? You know, 76% poverty too high at Kendall for Kendall to be successful. So lots of issues here. My purpose tonight is to simply make you aware of the data, but we'll return to this during your retreat during the summer, and hopefully it will influence us, because our job is to meet the needs of the community and the students that reside here. Okay, Mr. Barbas had asked for a residency enrollment update, and Dr. Costanzo is going to provide that.
Good evening, Board. Okay.
I think you have his slides in front of you.
Yes, we do.
Should have a hard copy.
Yep.
Great. So a couple of years ago, the board passed a residency policy that we began to enforce during the 2016-2017 school year. You might remember that we gave an update, I think it's about 1.5 years ago, providing you with updated data on the number of families that we had investigated, either centrally or via a private investigator, which was part of the policy initiative at the time of the policy passage. So I have some updates for you on the 18-19 school year, and I've also tried to tie in some of the ELL data that I thought was pretty glaring and interesting for us to look at as a board considers some of our residency issues. So keep in mind, we've been reduced in operations by a half of FTE. The Director of School Improvement has been running at a 0.5. This was the Director of School Improvements, one of her primary responsibilities was to oversee residency investigations. So our numbers in terms of investigations that are conducted by the central office are down slightly, but still at this point in the year, 15 investigations occurring at our level. Private investigator has been hired on 5 different occasions to investigate a specific case. These tend to last for several days. The private investigator goes out to the area where we suspect the student is living, and as well as the address that we have been given that we believe to be incorrect. And the private investigator spends several days observing behavior, how the family is getting the child to school. They do a report for each of these cases, includes photography, video, and then recommendations about whether or not this child is indeed living in Norwalk or not. So we've done that 5 times. Each time we have a private investigator go out and do one of these cases, it costs us about $1,000. And annually, the district has budgeted $10,000 for private investigations. So I think it's fair to say that we've been conservative in reaching out to the private investigator to ensure that the funds last through the end of the year, really targeting what we think are legitimate cases of possible non-resident situations.
Frank, can I just interject for 1 minute? Is that $1,000 per case? So,
$1,000 per case.
okay, does that investigator follow up from there? I mean, is there follow-up work?
That takes us from the time the private investigator is given the basic information
Right.
that the central office has been able to collect, and we haven't been able to substantiate that the kid is living in Norwalk. So from that point, the private investigator takes sometimes several weeks to observe, write up a summary report, and then, if needed, come to our appeal hearing, which happens in cases where, and I'll talk about this in a moment, where a family receives a letter from the operations office that their child will be disenrolled on this particular date because we have substantial evidence that they're not living in the city of Norwalk. By statute, that family has the opportunity to appeal the board's decision. We have one of those hearings coming up later this month. Private investigator will also be present at that hearing to provide the evidence that they've collected in the case.
Okay,
That's
so
also
so it's $1,000 total.
Right.
So what we're looking at, and from your experience from the private investigators, that the 5 cases that they've looked at, it's lasted about several weeks from beginning to end?
Some have been shorter, some have been a couple of weeks. I'll talk a little bit about how challenging some of these cases are. So if you look at this next slide, residency data analysis, you might remember that the Welcome Center used to actually do the registration process before we had that moved to operation. So what the Welcome Center now does is anytime they receive a new family who's coming in and attempting to register in Norwalk, they get in touch with Liz Roberson, who is the secretary in the operations office, who is really well-versed in going through the process of determining residency. So the number you see there indicates that we've had 153 ELL family students who are ELL based upon testing that we've done that have come through the operations office over the course of just this year to verify residency. And in only, we think it's less than 5, we think it's 3, but we said less than 5 of those 153 families are homeowners, new homeowners in Norwalk. So that underscores how challenging it is for the private investigator to determine whether the child is actually living in Norwalk or not. They're tend to be renters, they tend to be living in multifamily houses, and many of the families are not in a legal lease with a landlord. They're subletting or living with family or living in a single room in a multifamily house in one apartment that's being rented out to one person. We have 5 existing students, not new to the district, that have been investigated over the course of this year. 4 of those students were determined through the investigation to have relocated within the city of Norwalk, not outside of the city of Norwalk. And we actually have 2. There was one that came in today, but one found to be living in Bridgeport. They've received a disenrollment letter, and they have decided to appeal the process. And so they're going to be heard in a few days by the board's designated hearing officer. We have a second letter that went out today to another child at the elementary level who we believe is not living in Norwalk. They haven't received it, so we don't know yet whether they will appeal the process or not. And the other way we utilize a private investigator is to conduct observations of our train stations, stops. We did that last year. This year, I don't want to say exactly when we're doing it, but we're trying to time it around a time where we see an influx of students who are coming to the district who may be living in a town nearby or somewhere else in Fairfield County. So these numbers are really fascinating. Since the first day of this school year, we have had 1,667 students who have registered as new students to the city of Norwalk. Helene Becker has been really helpful in providing me with these specific ELL numbers. So of that 1,667, 196 were kindergarten ELL students registering for the first time in the system. And in our grades 1 through 12, 173 are new students who are ELL. When you break those down into percentages, if we're looking at this year and we're looking at the total number of new students to Norwalk, 1,667, you'll find that the kindergarten ELL population is close to 12% of the overall new students who are coming in. And grades 1 through 12, that 173 number, is closer to 10%. So what we're seeing is, while the district's overall ELL percentage is about 16%, as the superintendent suggested, the new students we're seeing register this year are about 20% of that group. And then lastly, we have, superintendent spoke earlier about January being a real spike and seeing new students coming into the district. We ran those numbers. So since October 1st, when the federal government looks at our actual numbers for the year, calculates funding, we've had 200 new students to the district since October 1st.
Frank, our enrollment hasn't gone up by that much. It's only like 45 net, right?
We have.
So did we lose that many students?
We do. We lose students to other districts and private schools. And also what's not built into these numbers, which would actually reverse that, would be we have somewhere around 30 students in the month of January that are pending in the system. So they haven't gotten all of their documentation in to start school. But 30 more ELLs that are not counted in these numbers. And overall, as a district, non-ELL, we have about 80 students who are on a pending list right now, waiting for various documents to come in so that they could begin school.
So that many new students. So there's that kind of turnover. Is that normal?
Well, I think in urban districts, we see an increase in transients or student mobility as a result of families losing their homes, needing to find temporary housing, leaving a home country for, a new country. We'll see a little bit further in the slides how many of our students are coming from outside the country.
Eric, did you have a quick question?
Yeah, Frank, do you have a breakdown of the number, the reasons behind the number of students that have left the district?
I don't think we do an exit survey at this time, but that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I think we would be able to capture some of those folks. I think oftentimes schools aren't even aware that the family has left until weeks or months later. But for those that are leaving that we're aware of, we could certainly put something together.
So Eric, we are looking into this January phenomenon.
Right.
And we believe that at least a part of that group actually returns to the country of origin in the summer and then comes back in January. And so, again, we're not clear on this. You pretty much have to, check this student by student by student, but that, we believe, is some of it. And
Are you talking about the increase or the decrease, Dr. Adams?
well, I'm talking about the January blimp, these students who join in January, who have been in school in their country of origin through December. We believe that some of that is reoccurring each year, where they would leave, not be there for the October 1 enrollment account, but come back in January. So again, what percentage of that 200 falls into that category, we don't know. We're going to be examining that. And so, and then we believe the rest of it is the turnover of families leaving the district being replaced by immigrant students.
And I do find that information useful. I think going back to the point I was speaking with Dr. Costanzo on, specifically the students that are leaving. Now, this conflated blimped number in January is these students aren't counted, and they're not part of the decrease that I'm actually interested in at the moment, because I'm curious as to why we're losing 145 students since the start of school.
Yeah.
You had given us that number verbally. I don't
Right.
think it was in one of the slides.
One of the things that this could include are also not only students that are leaving for private schools or for neighboring towns, but also students who are outplaced. Students who are expelled would not fall into this category. They still remain on our rolls. But that would be a small portion of the students as well.
Outplaced?
Special education outplaced.
Okay. And I
They
think
would
that-
be counted in the data.
Right, but
students
that's a
that leave the
very,
district.
very small number from my understanding, especially currently with our special ed services. Now, I did need to just ask one question. You said that some schools aren't knowing for weeks or months
Yeah.
if students are gone?
Now, there's what we do. No, they know that the student is gone, obviously.
Right, but I mean like gone permanently, gone out.
Well, if the family does not go to the school and disenroll the student and have their records sent to another school, the school does not know that. And, the student is on the rolls. They're planned for a class on the first day of school. By October 1, you realize they're not coming, but you're still holding the records. The student is still technically enrolled in the school.
Okay.
And I think that's what Frank is referring to. These are families who don't notify the school that they are moving.
Right. This State Department of Education has asked districts in Connecticut to not administratively disenroll the students many of the students that we're talking about who leave for weeks or months to go to their home country during a vacation period. In the past, districts, including Norwalk, used to just simply withdraw them from the system. They'd return several weeks or months later and then re-enroll in the system. I've had conversations with the State Department of Education about this, and they have been okay with our current process, which is to try and bring the family in if we're aware that they're leaving for a long period of time, try and convince them not to do it because of the concern, the stress this places on the child to be gone for so long, return, and have to catch back up. But we do need the parent to actually officially withdraw the student and provide the education that they will be getting while they are away from Norwalk in order for us to actually disenroll the child from the system. So our chronic absenteeism number last year went up a bit, and that absolutely correlates with with this phenomenon that we're talking about.
May I ask a question? Of course, please. I'm not sure I understood what you said. Dr. Adamowski, what I call no-shows as of October 1st, what happens to them in terms of our official enrollment numbers? Are they removed?
They are.
Yeah, I think if they're not there by October 1st, but again, the state does not want us to disenroll a student just because they're not there on the first day of school.
But that would be fraught with potential problems.
Well,
because
that's
nobody
true,
knows.
but understand that October 1 is the enrollment count, okay? So you're only counting the students who are there.
But I'm talking about
attending
students who
school.
were never there, no-shows.
Right, so they would stay on the school's rolls until October 1st.
And after October 1st is my question. What
They'll be
happens?
gone.
Removed?
No, they're gone at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Now, we would have, the opposite occurring sometime, where a student would go on vacation for a long period of time. Let's say it was back to Puerto Rico, although given the problems in Puerto Rico, that's happening less and less now. And again, the State Department wants us to try to convince the family to stay and not go back and forth.
Okay, the next couple of data points here, courtesy of Helene. 173 non-kindergarten new ELLs, those are students in grades 1 through 12. 130 of those 173 come from other countries, 27 from other towns within Connecticut, 16 from school districts outside of the state of Connecticut, 18 born in the United States, 155 born outside of the United States. Here is a breakdown of new ELLs just between October 1st and today's date and country of origin. And you can see that Honduras in the lead with 29, Guatemala 22, and a total here of 80. So clearly this is a challenging area for the district. Residency is a challenge to manage and monitor, particularly when the new families who are coming in are renting spaces, sometimes legally, sometimes illegally throughout the city, and it becomes extremely difficult for us to be able to verify whether they are truly living in the residence that they're providing. Liz Roberson has done an outstanding job. She is often on the phone with a landlord or somebody else verifying whether the person lives there, having people come down to the third floor to provide the affidavit that the people who are coming to Norwalk are actually living in the city. What we're finding is that in more cases than not, when we are enlisting a private investigator, we are dealing with a student who is an existing student in Norwalk, who's been in the district for a couple of years, sometimes several years, and we believe is now being transported from outside of Norwalk in. I think some things for the board to be thinking about and considering. We've talked about this before, but we're going to need resources and infrastructure to do this. Would be to really focus in on a couple of different areas in the K-12 scale. I think if you look at 5th grade to 6th grade, 8th grade to 9th grade, and obviously incoming kindergarten, those are 3 areas that we should really target, look at closely, scrutinize residency applications, because it is a complicated process to remove a non-resident, and much easier to be proactive on the front end.
Frank, to follow up on that, I know when we first started this process with Patty Foley, that was definitely discussed especially the kids going into high school having a re-registration period. And we know there's a cost involved, but obviously there's a cost involved in having non-resident students attending our schools. And I think it's very helpful, our mayor's here tonight, to hear as we debate this. But, you know, and we're doing a lot this year, so obviously this year wasn't the year to propose it. But I know we thought we needed a lead time, and some of our staff is only 10 months, and we really need 12 months, you know, for someone to be there over the summer to re-register these kids. But maybe we should really plan on that for next year. We have 12 months now that we will, you know, figure out what manpower we need, what systems we need, and maybe we wouldn't do it all at the same time, but maybe it'd be, you know, I think there's so many kids going to high school, and we only have effectively 2 high schools, that going into 9th grade would be a period of re-registration, which we've never had before. And then a few years down the road, you would do that as kids go into 6th grade.
I think 8th to 9th would be the first place.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That would be my suggestion. I haven't really looked at costs or what structures we would need to modify and what that would cost, but I think that would be a good place.
Let's put that on our to-do list.
So there was a report recently, I think it was in the Connecticut Mirror, that said that 80% of all immigration to Connecticut was to Fairfield County. And that's because there is a large number of service jobs in Fairfield County that attract immigrants. No comparison to the rest of the state. And so you have to combine that then with housing costs. You know, where can you live? If you're on a very low income, you're an immigrant, you virtually have no funds. And so, you know, the first choice would be to live with relatives or friends or so on. So that basically, you know, in terms of the housing costs, focuses Bridgeport, Norwalk, and Stamford. And so this is, you know, this economic reality, you know, is what determines why we're receiving this level of immigration.
Yeah, no, I want to thank Mike for bringing this up, and Frank, thank you for the comprehensive report. But I remember policy looking at this closely with Pat, and also Patty being instrumental in kind of moving this along. But I think we do need to have a more robust investigation of what we're doing now, but targeting also the 8th to 9th grade area to see what we can do there. But it's interesting to see that central office investigations are 15. So that was for the whole year, right? 2018?
Year to date.
Year to date, right, starting when we're beginning of 2019. From your experience, the referrals, the school referrals, and we talked about this going to like a staff member speaking to a social worker or a principal and then letting central office know. So how has that been going? Has that been fairly seamless so far?
Yeah, and it's been consistent.
Okay.
So we periodically will get a call from a school that they have reason to believe that student is not coming to school from within Norwalk, either because mail's being returned, they're not taking the bus any longer. You know, even the student may be expressing it, particularly at the elementary level.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, so now for the surprise. You may recall you received a invitation recently, I think last week, to the release of the SEED report, SEAD. And this is the report that was financed by the Dalio Foundation that has created a research link between social and emotional education and improved student performance. And the Dalios decided or asked if they could release the report at Tracy School. And that was because of the correlation between Tracy's work in character education the last 3 years and the significant gains they have made in student achievement each of those 3 years. And so we're all geared up for that. We were geared up for that tomorrow morning at 9. We were notified late this afternoon that Governor Lamont is going to attend as well. So we're going to be very honored to host the governor at Tracy tomorrow. I understand the mayor's been invited as well. And so I would just like to make you aware of that. If you want to reconsider your invitation, what I meant to go is to go. If you weren't planning to go and you did want to go, I just wanted to make you aware of that, and we're very honored. We're looking forward to it. And again, I think we're also delighted that Tracy is being used as the poster child for the findings of the SEED report, which is the link between social and emotional learning and student achievement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Okay. We are moving on to action. Sorry. I thought there was going to be one more thing in the superintendent's report, but that was it. So, and actions, we'll start with the consent calendar. This is approval of some personnel changes, approval of budget transfers, and approval of trips. So this is 2A, 2B, 2C1, 2C2, 2C3. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Eric. Seconded, Ms. Keys. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Unanimous?
Aye.
Thank you, Sarah. So I forgot to mention, Sarah Lemieux has called in, so
I'm still wondering where that noise.
I've been listening this whole time. It's been fascinating discussions.
Thank you, Sarah.
Is it I?
Okay.
I thought it was a roll.
Our next action is recognition of Black History Month, February 2019. Could I have a motion?
So moved.
Eric, seconded by Mr. Kimmel, Dr. Kimmel. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Thank you. All in favor? Now, the next topic is the approval of the sunset of the Special Education Development Fund.
And we have a brief presentation by Ms. Gorovich preceding your discussion and vote on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a very exciting time, as I'm sure we'll hear. A lot went through with Special Education Development Fund, thanks to the city's, working with us in partnership. And I think I'm glad we're reviewing this, but we actually did what we said we were going to do, which doesn't always happen.
Thank you so much.
Yvette,
Good evening,
please.
board members. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. So you're about to consider a resolution authorizing the sunset of the 3-year Special Ed Development Fund. You know the details. We've discussed it at many board meetings. In total, it was a $3.6 to $3.7 million investment that the city made in specialized services. It is now sunsetting at the end of this budget cycle. So what happened? Who have we served? What's the trends? Are we at the intersection? And what is our trend projection for the future? So as we spoke a little this evening, this is as of October 1st data. Slightly different than the data that Superintendent Adamowski just reviewed as of January 1. But it shows over the past 4 years the increase in services students identified with disabilities. As we look and drill down on that data, you'll see that there is an increase from the end of last year to October 1 of this, from October 1 of last year to October 1 of this year, an increase of approximately 100 children. That is due to students moving in with IEPs from other districts at a slightly higher rate than they are moving out with IEPs. It is the satisfaction factor. We are also doing early identification, particularly of students presenting with characteristics of dyslexia and with autism. Just a note on the male-female issue. Nationally, males are identified at almost 18% of the school population, and females are identified at around 8% of the school population. So what we're seeing is a national phenomenon. There are some disorders that are genetically linked. In some cases, like Fragile X, 25 to 1 males to females. We can hypothesize why that happens, but it's a national trend, and sometimes it is specifically genetically linked.
May I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Of course.
Has that data been compared to a data of the general population of adults identified with mental illnesses?
Interesting, it is a reverse correlation.
That's right.
In the total population, females are identified with mental illness, schizophrenia, depression. More frequently, it could be that females are seeking psychiatric services at higher rates. In the aging population, because of mortality rates, females are identified in the lifespan far more frequently than males because women live longer, when we look at those trends. So the Special Ed Development Fund was set up to do two major focuses. The first was to develop in-district programs of quality that would reduce our reliance on very costly out-of-district programs. And the second was to stop the contracting and look to create in-house staffing that were Norwalk public school employees. And as you see, the trends over the past 5 years with regard to the out-of-district placements, we went from 137 to 84 as of now, and we're projecting 80, and those are children with IEPs that we account for. We know who they are. We're projecting some movement of students out of out-of-district programs, and I should note that 23 of those 80 students are in 11th and 12th grade. So as those students continue to graduate, age out, we're replacing at a much lower rate as we develop our in-district programs. So I really need to thank you all for the support, and it has done what we expected it to do and beyond. I do want to thank a group of people sitting behind me, and those are the supervisors and the coordinators that have worked very hard to implement your investment. Preschool numbers are very interesting. As of October 1, we are up this year, and that is a good thing. The research all tells us early identification makes a major difference, and we're serving more students across the city, preschool ages 3 and 4. The very interesting data, at least for me, regarding the trends and the projections, and this ties out to your budget book. I'm not going to go into detail. I know that you did that last week. But you can see over the course of the past 4 years, these are not projections, these are actual numbers. The number of agreements have decreased. The number of contracts for outside services has decreased dramatically, and we have 2 assistive technology specialists that we've hired. The cost of doing that business with out-of-district or contracts has virtually been eliminated. We will be working continuously on the issue of independent evaluations as we continue to train staff to do those high-level assessments. And of course, this ties out in the budget book. If you look at your 330 line, it happens to be on page 83, you'll see a major decrease of $1.5 million in the regular special ed funding request for next year. You'll see a similar decrease in the out-of-district tuition. So it's tying out. Just very quickly, the 5-year trends on the contract costs are here. You'll see major increases that began in 2014-15, continued for a few years, then you made your investment, and now you see the investment is being realized. 16-17, we were at a high of $7.3 million in contract costs. 19-20, we're projecting 2.6, and that allows us to reinvest in services in district. And finally, tying out to the entire budget, your support to sunset the special ed fund is well-founded. We've set a maintenance of the base budget. In 18-19, we've done caseload equity. We've done the program development. And while sunsetting, we can absorb those costs using internal Norwalk Public Schools. So I suggest to you it is possible to do excellent program development, implementation, and be cost-effective as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to thank Yvette and our supervisors who are in the audience tonight for their vision, leadership, hard work that was necessary to effectively utilize this one-time opportunity and resource presented by the Special Ed Development Fund. And I would close just by reading from the resolution in your backup. The board thanks the mayor and city council for their participation in the highly successful partnership of the Special Education Development Fund that enables a significant number of Norwalk students with special needs to receive their educational and related services in district while stabilizing the escalating special education costs created by the previously disproportionate number of outside placements.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so yes.
Sorry. Yvette, can I just ask a question on page 6, that 10 out of 25? Does that mean that 10 students were identified to need services through their IEE? What is that statistic?
So an IE is a complex process. Parents have the right to request IEEs, independent educational evaluations, second opinions, if you will, at public expense when they disagree with an evaluation completed by the school district. There are occasions when they're not entitled, and there are also occasions where we've requested impartial hearings, and because we believe that our evaluations were appropriate. That 10 out of 25 represents 10 individual students in total who received 25 independent evaluations. So some students may have received 3 or 4 prongs of different assessments as part of that.
So we have a jump between 2015 and 2016, and then 2017, 2018. Can you kind of speak to what's happening there?
I think parents have, been advised by advocates to request independent evaluations, and we're seeing that.
Wouldn't they only request an independent evaluation if they are not receiving an offer of services?
No.
In PPT?
It's any time that you disagree, a parent disagrees with an evaluation. It's not a disagreement of an IEP, it's a disagreement of an evaluation.
What I'm saying is that the number of people who are disagreeing has doubled.
No, from 16, 17, that's the data that we had available. It's somewhat flat from 17, 18, and 18, 19. It's clearly an area that we are identifying as a major focus for next year. Not a lot of students. Remember, we're serving 1,600 students, so this represents 1%. It's a very, very small number, but nonetheless, it's costly, and we should be assessing students appropriately. Sure.
Great, thank you.
Julie.
Sarah has a comment.
Oh, Sarah?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on what Dr. Adamowski had said and thank Yvette and thank the special education administrators and sort of bring it back to what I think is a really important thing to focus on, which is that by developing these programs and being efficient with the budget that we were given, we're able to help so many more children. The more efficiently we use this budget and with this wonderful program development that we've been doing, we can help more kids. And so thank you all for your work on that.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. Bruce?
Thank you. As I've said in the past, this is an issue that goes back into the 1990s at least, and every Board of Ed and council and mayor up to present company has always indicated, no, we can't afford this. This is too complicated. And nothing ever got done. The situation got worse and worse, and thankfully the 3 correct reports forced the issue. And I remember the first time Dr. Adamowski presented to the mayor, I happened to be in the room, the proposal. I think Mr. Lyons may also have been in the room at the time. Yep. We looked at it, and I kind of skeptical because, this is supposed to be impossible to do. And there was, what did I see? Nothing more than a list of positions and that kind of thing. So Dr. Adamowski, Mayor Rilling, thank you. This has been tough, but this has killed a lot of districts, and the inability to deal with this kind of stuff. And it's not just a financial issue. I think what got lost in all of our discussions over the years, that you've got an ethical issue where children can't go to school in their own communities. And we kept losing sight of that and saying we couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford it. But they lived in our communities, and they weren't getting the services they deserved and were legally required to get, so they had to move out. And so many children and families have come to this Norwalk, they send their kids to the community schools, and they get a decent education. But for years and years, Norwalk and other towns, we did not deal with that issue. We did not deal with the problems associated with the rights of kids with special needs. They get an education in the same buildings and near where their friends are, where their neighbors are, and that kind of stuff. And we finally addressed that. So as good as it is for the budget, the bigger issue is the human issue for these kids going forward. And that we should really be proud of that. What we've done is really a humane, humanistic approach to education.
Great.
Thank you,
Brian?
Yeah, it's a rewarding milestone. I won't repeat everything you guys have said, but you recall 4 or 5 years ago, we walked into a process that had no controls. The costs were growing at like 20 to 50% a year, and to the point where you said it was a historical problem, but it was really starting to boil about 5 years ago, where we got to this point. And I say this is a rewarding milestone, realizing there's a lot more work to do, but I think we can all sit back and congratulate ourselves for getting this executed.
Great.
Thanks.
Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation tonight. Starting from when I was on the Board of Estimate and Taxation before I joined this body, I remember reviewing the education budget and just looking at special education and what did seem as an insurmountable goal, trying to not just address the financial needs for the city and our taxpayers, but the needs of the students. Yet here we are making tremendous headway. And it is very reassuring to know that we've had a team of administrators, city officials, my colleagues that I'm serving on the board with now, as well as those that I served with in my first 2 years, that really have, by and large, come together to try and do the best for what Norwalk really does deserve. Excellent and exceptional education for all students, and seeing the numbers of students coming back in, and not everything's perfect. And that was something I came into this with a good understanding on. And I know that, as Mr. Meek said, this is a milestone that we've achieved, and it's going to be one of many, hopefully, as we continue to support this area of focus for our students, because we need it, because all students need to be successful. So thank you, and thank you to all of my colleagues that have worked tremendously on this, as well as our current chairwoman, who is in the little tripod device here, sitting with us in voice only. So thank you all.
I'm over here.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for your input. I hope the mayor realizes that how appreciative we are and how successful this has been. The resolution, the motion I'd like to have approved reads as follows. Resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools that the Board of Education, pursuant to its memorandum of agreement with the City of Norwalk dated June 29, 2016, an operating budget request to the Norwalk City Council for fiscal year 1920 takes action to sunset the Special Education Development Fund, otherwise known as the plan, effective June 30th, 2019. And I note the memorandum of agreement that was signed at that time by our chairman, Mike Lyons, and Mayor Harry Rilling was on June 28th, 2016. So not quite 3 years ago. Eric?
So moved.
Okay, second. Heidi Keys. All in favor?
Aye.
We
Aye.
unanimously- Thank you, Sarah. Okay,
I'm
so
still here.
that has now taken place. I did miss one thing I did not realize. I'd like to just read, we did approve unanimously to approve African American History Month, and I just wanted to read a small piece for everybody. So throughout the month of February, we are going to be encouraging members of our community, schools, educators, and students to honor the achievements of Black Americans and to recognize the substantial role of African Americans throughout history. In 1925, Harvard-trained historian Dr. Carter G. Woodson raised awareness of the contributions of Black Americans with the first Negro History Week. The celebration was held in February to coincide with the birthdays of President Abraham Lincoln and abolitionist Frederick Douglass. The observation was expanded in 1976 to a month-long celebration as part of the nation's bicentennial. Since then, every U.S. president has officially designated the month of February as African American History Month. Other countries around the world, including Canada and the United Kingdom, also devote a month to celebrating Black history. The Board of Education of Norwalk Public Schools are pleased to join in this annual tribute. Every year, Norwalk Public School classrooms across the district highlight African American History Month by learning about historical figures, inventors, educators, and civil rights leaders. Educators highlight books written by African American authors and poets and incorporate videos and other resources into everyday lessons. Students discuss subjects such as school integration and civil rights, landmark decisions, and the role of African Americans in military history. By declaring this African American History Month, the Board of Ed encourages all schools to share in activities and celebrations honoring generations of African Americans who have positively influenced our community and our country. So I'm sorry I had missed that originally. Next, we will move to the recommendations of the board's Finance Committee regarding the fiscal year 1920 operating budget request. Could I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Dr. Kim? Oh, sorry, Mr. Lyons?
I'll move to approve the recommended operating budget as approved by the Finance Committee in the amount of $202,591,484, as was included in the packet, the notice sent out from the Finance Committee.
Okay. Mr. Meek?
I would like to second that motion, and then I would like to follow on with a proposal to amend the motion as it stands. The proposal is to remove certain items for furniture, fixture, and equipment and move those over to the capital request that we are going to vote on immediately after. For the board members, I am referring to items in the packet handed out on page 42. It aligns with SOP goal number 5, Montessori furniture, for the amount of $160,000. Moving to page 44, there are 3 items: $40,000 under finance for district-wide furniture, under facilities, $100,000 for life safety systems, and under special education, $107,000 for equipment. This is a total of a $407,000 reduction, reducing the request for the operating budget to $202,184,484. I would like to also note that in relative to our 18-19 adjusted operating budget, this represents a near $9.8 million increase, or 5.1%, getting us closer to more numbers that we can work more reasonably with the city. So I would like to make that motion and have somebody second that.
I'll second.
Is that okay, Mr. Lyons?
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kimball?
A question on, we're discussing the amendment.
The amendment,
also.
correct.
Right. So, Mr. Meek, I assume, based on your knowledge as an accountant and your discussions with our finance folks, that these are indeed capital items, and we're not setting a precedent by going beyond generally accepted accounting rules for what's capital and what's operating.
Yeah, that's to my knowledge. These are, furniture, fixture, and equipment is generally depreciated over a 7-year period. That's clearly not an operational item. It gets consumed over its economic life, which is anywhere from 5 to 7 years, depending on the type of equipment or furniture.
Thank you.
Mr. Erickson? I mean, Mr. Anderson.
Whatever, it's either way work, Mr. Chair. Point of information, however, we do have a motion on the floor that was moved and seconded by Mr. Lyons and seconded by Mr. Meek before the amendment was introduced. So would that first motion need to be withdrawn before we can vote on Mr. Meek's amended?
No, because this is an amendment of the first motion. That's the main motion, and then the motion to amend is a subsidiary motion, which you then debate. If that's adopted, it becomes part of the main motion.
Fantastic.
Robert's rules.
Robert's rules. Gotta love it.
So we have, we have a motion, it's been seconded, we've had a question, and now, would there be discussion?
Yeah, there's discussion on the amendment.
Okay, discussion on the amendment, yes?
Yeah, I will support the amendment. In general, as you all know, I have certain reservations about the city's policies regarding capital and operating expenses. Once something is in the capital budget, we can lose control over it, and the Common Council often finds itself voting on items that it really knows very little to nothing about that pertain directly to education. I guess, again, I'm arguing for closer, better relations between the council and the Board of Ed to ensure that whenever these things do come up for a vote, probably in this room sometime next year, that all the council folks, or from the Land Use and Building Management Committee and the full council, they're very much aware of what these items are all about. And that goes also for those so-called consumables, workbooks, or whatever they're called today, that are in the operating budget. We've got to make sure that the Land Use and Building Management Committee of the council, as well as the full council, they know what they're voting on, and we are aware that they are voting on it, and we should be somewhat involved in that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kimmel. Any other discussion
Are we only discussing the amendment?
at this point in time? Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
For the operating budget. Okay, so all in favor of the amendment? Okay, that's unanimous. Sarah?
Sarah?
You're on mute.
I'm sorry, I got distracted for 1 second. What's happening?
We're voting on the amendment to the budget.
Voting on Brian's amendment. Aye.
Okay, so then it's all in favor?
Right, so now we have the
9-0.
main motion as amended.
Yes,
is now on the
so now the main motion as amended is what is on the floor. Any further discussion?
I have a question.
Julie, yes.
Can Mr. Meek just give a little snapshot on any changes? Because I know there were some changes
Yeah,
that happened from
there
our
were-
workshop to the vote. Can you
there
just
were,
summarize those, please?
There were some, the major change was, we decided that, given the committee was still in the midst of working and didn't have really a final number on a budget that we could use for high school early start times, we've agreed within the committee to defer that to a 2021 request. And, in a few months, or as quick as that committee convenes its work, we'll have a better idea of just what we want to do. And I understand there's some interesting options. I found interesting an idea that K through 8 would share one bus, and we could actually save money on buses. That's very interesting to me. So I'm looking forward to that committee finishing its work on that. And then there were a half dozen items. They're in your packet, and they add up to like $1,000. It's money found and money spent at the same time. I don't know if you want to discuss any of those, but they're pretty self-explanatory.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mike, can I just introduce?
Yes, Heidi.
Are you going? No. Okay. If I can just kind of explain a little bit further about the delayed start times. For me, it started back almost 2 years ago in April, attending a conference in Washington. So I think we can all agree the science behind how important it is for early start times, specifically for our high school students. Not early start times, delayed start times for our high school students. But we have a really robust committee that will continue to work on this. We have a 16-member committee that's made up of parents, teachers, principals, administrators, and staff. Our chief academic officer, our director at Brian McMahon High School is also part of this committee. So we're really invested in making this work at some point. I understand as far as the budgetary concerns, and I understand we will look to defer this for the 1920 or 2021 school year. We've got a lot of work to do as far as the committee is concerned. We want to be as transparent, as open as possible. During this time, we have high school meetings that we're going to have, focus groups with parents and communities members as well. In addition to that, we spoke about having our elementary and middle school component of that and having focus groups as well. In addition to that, having high school meetings, going to our two of our high schools and having focus groups really centered in on our students, getting their input and getting their feedback as well. In addition to that, having a survey that will be going out to the whole community. So we realize this is going to take time and effort. Also on the table are 3 potential options, options A, B, and C. We're not sure yet. We have a placeholder for, I believe, over $720,000. We're not sure if we're going to go over that or go under that at that point. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of options, a lot of networking, and just getting out to the community and getting their input, because this will be a huge change for our schools here in Norwalk. So I could say that I'm vested in this. I believe I speak to my other board members that we're fully vested in this, but we realize the budget restraints at this point. So I'm hoping that we will, again, as Mr. Meek had mentioned, it'll be deferred and we can look back at this, but the committee's work, and I know Dr. Adamowski has been instrumental in getting the committee going, will continue to work on this.
Thank you, Heidi. Mr. Anderson.
Call me Steve or Tony, maybe. Hey, why not? I know. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Erickson, maybe we can get a nameplate made up for me. I did want to echo some sentiments of Ms. Keys. Since I've been on this board, this has been a topic we have discussed, and it's been the forefront of what we would like to get this district to. Key point is at some point. And that point, unfortunately, for me, is not right now. Biggest concern for me is the budget constraints. I want to be respectful of our partners in the city. I want to also make sure that we continue to maintain our funding in areas that are going to continue moving forward the amazing work we've done. And at points like this, I have to look at new initiatives and weigh out, is this the right time to do it? And also, as Mr. Gianderco said earlier, continue, in this case, to do the work we've been doing by reaching out to our partners, continuing to engage with the community. I think this is a topic that really does deserve the continued input, the continued feedback. So when we do get to do this, it is done properly, successfully, and really has the overall benefit that this can have for the district. Unfortunately for me, that time is not right now, so I do support the continuation of this without it being in the budget for this next fiscal year.
Can I just add one other comment? I think piggybacking on what Mr. Anderson had mentioned, getting everyone involved in this because it's going to affect Norwalk, and I think in a very positive way, but we want to get as much input as possible. But as a committee, we want to do our due diligence. It's not something we want to rush through, in which we've been doing, looking at other towns and districts, their successes, their failures as well, and how we can make that right for Norwalk. So it will take time. We don't want to rush through it again, but again, our due diligence on this and really getting input, advice, and knowledge from the experts, which we also have at our committee, to move this forward at some point.
Okay.
I am, of course, disappointed about the delay, partially because, the timing would then be we would have a new superintendent to administer the change, and that is a tough issue to come into as a new person. So I think it's unfortunate that the timing didn't work out, that this was a strategic operating plan initiative that was meant to be executed last year, as studied last year, and it was delayed. And it's now being studied, but we are not choosing to keep the placeholder so that we could execute this year if we could plan it well. I completely agree with my colleagues that we have to do it well, and I think it has to work for all levels, high school, middle school, and elementary school. We can't have a negative impact in one area so that we get a positive impact in the other. That said, I do understand the fiscal realities and accept them, but hope that we don't abandon this if it turns out in the process of the work of the committee that we could financially do it and that we've answered all the questions and everybody's on board with the plan. Perhaps during reconciliation, we could bring it back up again. I would ask my colleagues to consider that.
Dr. Gemmell?
Yeah, I want to make sure Mr. Meek, when you, did your amendment bring the overall increase down to 9.8 million and 5.1%?
Relative to the adjusted operating budget for 18-19?
Right, yes, of course, yes. So I would like to, let me make sure. So we started out 12.8 million?
Oh, I'm using a little accounting sleight of hand, I'll be honest, but I'm working off the adjusted budget that we're operating on right now.
Okay.
So that does include a little rollover of surplus funds plus sped, but since we're losing sped, I think in all fairness, we can make that a valid comparison. It would go back to some of the numbers in the packet if we were just going on what we approved here 364 days ago.
Right.
But there were adjustments made to that budget, and that's my calculus from there, because it's more of an honest representation of what we needed to run 18-19, and here's our request in addition to that.
Fair enough. Just the, I want to compliment, I enjoyed the discussion in the Finance Committee meeting. I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was very serious. We understand our ask was a big ask. An increase, 12.8 million, however we calculate it. And I think almost all of us were aware that that was what I have called the last of our catch-up budgets. 3 or 4 years ago, the district was not in a good place. We lacked all kinds of basic services. The Board of Ed, prior to a number of us being wanted to adopt a strategic operating plan that has created a school system that is nothing like what existed 4 or 5 years ago. So we should really be proud of that. And I'd like to emphasize, possibly because I wore 2 hats in this entire process, that the city, Mayor Rilling, Board of Estimate Taxation, and Council, despite some of the friction that did occur over time, we've done this together. And this, when we look back on these 4 or 5 years, we'll be proud of what happened in Norwalk, and I believe this part of our legacy will last longer, or people will remember longer than, oh, we got the mall, or they fixed the walk bridge. This is really key to the long-term success of the city. So this, along with our special ed turnaround, is something we should be proud of. I want to emphasize something that we talked about since last July. Honestly speaking, I think we put the city in a bind last year by presenting only 1 year without a multi-year scenario. We asked the city to fly blind. They had no idea what we were going to present this year. Unlike last year, right now, we have in our packets and the information basically we've projected 3 subsequent years of spending after this year, which will take us down to 2.8% when we're finally done. Now, the point is, just as with special ed, where there was an intersection point, I think it's fair to say we've passed that when it comes to the turnaround of our school system. What we agreed to in July was essentially what we need to get us to the place that we're proud of, where we're comfortable in. If we can't afford it all this year, we'll do it next year or the year after. The timeline can be adjusted. But this is basically a catch-up budget. We still have a few things left to do. We're looking forward to working with the city what we can't afford this year, we'll afford next year or the year after. The bottom line is together, we'll make this happen. And at the end of the day, we'll be very proud of our school system, and we will see the results. So I want to congratulate those board members who started this process. It was before we were on it. This took a lot of guts because it wasn't going to be cheap. Mayor Rillen, a lot of money came from your end. We appreciate that, and looking forward to working with you on this budget. Thank you very much, and I proudly support this.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, I think, Mr. Lyons?
Yeah, I want to just follow up on Bruce's point that, we view what we're doing here as sort of, we've occasionally used the sort of the military term of surge, which is a short-term, significant increase in resources that you're pouring into something, whether it's a military campaign or it's rebuilding a school system. And I think back, when we first started working on the updated strategic plan with Dr. Adamowski, I think at our first retreat, he presented, there's basically two models of how you make school systems better. One is incremental little changes, and the other is big changes. And he said, if you're in a suburban school district like one of the towns around here, where you don't have all of the issues that we have to deal with here, like a huge ELL population, for instance, things of that sort, you can make little incremental changes and things steadily get better. But starting out with a huge achievement gap, a huge gap between where our students were and the rest of the state, if we approached that in this way, we'd close the achievement gap in 30 years. So we needed a strategic plan. We needed a big surge in funding to make it happen. And I think what we're asking for here, if you look at our projections, big increase this year, 4% next year, 3.36 in 21-22, and 2.83 in 22-23. Point being that you've had the big surge of funding to fix a lot of the things that were not working. And from that point on, you can reach something of a steady state, and maybe where that slow incremental model that works in the suburban schools becomes more applicable here. And I think our success with doing exactly that with the special education funding shows that the way our administration is carrying these things out, we have the capacity to do this. I served, like you did, on the finance board years ago, before there was strategic planning of any kind at the school system, and there would be big asks, and there was nothing behind it. There was no strategic plan. There was no well thought out plan to get us from point A to point B. It was just throwing money at it. That has, as Bruce said, fundamentally changed over the last 4 or 5 years or so. I think we've established that the board and the administration can execute things like this. We proved it with the special ed fund, and I think we can do the same thing here. This is not simply asking for more money so we can have more money. It's asking for more money so we can complete carrying out a strategic plan, which already has established Norwalk as the highest performing municipal, urban school system in the state. And I think promises to, get us to the point where we can be exceeding many of the performance levels that are established statewide in Connecticut. So I'm very supportive of this budget. As you said, it is a big ask, but there's a lot behind it. It's not just an ask. It's an ask with a big substantive plan behind it, and I'm happy to support it.
Great. Okay, well, if there's, Sarah, do you have any comments?
Nope, and I'm actually sitting quietly waiting for my kids to fall asleep.
Okay, well, we'll try to keep it down. So we don't want to wake them up either. We want them to stay asleep. But I think at this point in time, I'd kind of like Heidi to be here, but all those in favor? Okay, Sarah?
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
so unanimous vote. and we'll take Heidi's pulse when she comes, but I'm
Comes back
assuming
in, let her vote.
she'll be in favor. Okay, so that's the operating budget, so it's an adjusted amount, it's 202,184,484, is that right, Brian?
Yes, sir, 202-184-484.
And you'll provide those list of adjustments to Kristen and Tom?
Yeah,
You're on it, okay.
They have them.
Good. I just didn't want there to be any confusion, that's all. Okay, so now we will move on to recommendation from the Facilities Committee and approval of the capital budget request, which we would submit to the city. Could I have a motion?
I have a
That would
question.
actually, they'd actually have to amend the capital budget also.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, but I didn't hear you vote.
Yeah, we voted on the amendment first.
And then voted on your motion.
Yep,
Okay.
we had two separate votes.
Okay, could I have a motion?
Still in my thunder.
I'll move,
Dr.
That would be a
Kimball,
second.
second Eric.
Okay.
we need to amend it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for sending. I'd like to propose we amend the capital budget by amounts previously discussed in the operating expense totaling for furniture, fixtures, and equipment totaling $407,000. In addition to that sum, I would also like to propose an amendment to the capital budget for a special $100,000 asbestos removal project at Rowayton that's sorely needed. So that is my proposed amendment.
Okay,
And I'll second the amendment.
okay. And seconded by Mr.
Question about the amendment.
Anderson. Yes, sir.
Anderson.
Yes, Dr. Kimball, you have a question?
Yes,
On the
I
amendment.
know, a couple of years ago, this is interesting, because there was a special fund for asbestos
Yes.
abatement. I'm
That-
assuming,
Those funds have all been spent.
that's all I'm asking.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Those funds have all been spent. There is, just in full disclosure, there are several projects that we have done that are eligible for state reimbursement that we have closed, the state has not closed. And there is a little bit of money in those projects. I mean, we're not talking huge money, but there is like $100,000. If the state just closed the project out, we could tap that money. But recently, the state has been nitpicky and saying, oh, we're not going to reimburse that, so that the project is short, so it really needs those funds. So we might be able to tap that down the road, but at this point in time, we don't believe we have access to those funds, so that's why we're adding this $100,000.
Now, a follow-up question, $100,000 is not a whole lot. What do you expect to do with the money?
This is, you maybe received some pictures, all the main hallway of the building.
I saw that.
All that would be removed, but it's a
Okay.
very long hallway. I forget the length of it. but it's a
Okay,
very long hallway.
has anybody been, often, in my experience, if you're going to do the entire hallway, I don't know if you have to contain the school or whatever.
You do.
Okay, you have to contain the
Has to be
school.
closed.
Which adds to the cost. Has there been any investigation of other hotspots or other problem areas? So we would do them at the same time?
I think this, if you recall, an addition was done to Rowayton School, so some
Right.
of the other hazardous materials there were PCBs and some window caulk. That was dealt with.
It's already dealt with.
So I think this is one of the remaining.
Okay, okay.
I don't know if it's only, but I think it's the most obvious. Barbara?
I'm supportive of this project. I think Rowayton needs this work done. I'm frustrated by the process. Can we get an overview of the asbestos work that needs to be done so that we have an idea of what's coming down the pipeline and things don't, sometimes projects seem to leapfrog over other projects, and I'm not quite sure how that happens.
Right.
So, everything is encapsulated, right? So technically, it does not present a hazard. Now, once you encapsulate on a year-to-year basis, you're going to have areas where the encapsulation deteriorates. And this is the case in the Rowayton hallway, where you now have encapsulated sealed tiles that are chipped and loose and being removed, and you need to be removed, and so on. The other issue is if we have to do other work, as we did at Cranberry with the replacement of the carpeting. So Cranberry was down for 2 summers, and the building completely sealed off in order to do that work. So those two things, those two occurrences, doing other work and damage to the encapsulation as a result of wear, are going to create a situation where from time to time, outside of a systematic plan, this type of work would need to be done.
And we don't have any other schools that have anything like this that we should include in this?
No,
amendment?
except that there may be other remediation at Cranberry when the dining room goes on. It may be of a slightly different nature, but again, whenever we do work at another school, that's the time to take care of this, or if it's going to be damaged by the work, it has to come out first.
And another example also, the old Columbus School, one of the reasons our cost estimates have gone up there is how much asbestos we did discover there that's in there. So, as Dr. Adamowski said, as we go from project to project, we're coming across there. Okay, Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say I do support this amendment. I received the emails today as well, and I'd heard about this issue going on at Rowayton School. I was a little alarmed at the speed and the nature in which it came initially, but as I sat and I thought about it, I thought about the students and the staff going through these halls every day. I also think about the number of District 99 kids, the kids that live in South Norwalk, District 8. And at the end of the day, if this is a project that can be remediated to avoid any health hazards and any exposure of very hazardous material to students and staff, I support it wholeheartedly. I wish, again, maybe it could have been a little bit quicker, but I do also feel that this is a school that has taken a great deal of consideration, and also a school that spends a considerable amount of time raising funds and being supportive of the building and initiatives to make sure that it can get the best that it can get. So I continue to support this motion for that reason.
Thank you. Mr. Meek?
Yeah, just to, take the accounting hat off for a while, but all these items, right, are things that improve the buildings, which are citywide assets. They're not, unlike a textbook or something, right? Like, the building's there for, like, the entire city, community events, more than just the school system. So I think it's smart to move these items underneath the capital budget, as they're more shared resources for us.
Okay. But Dr. Kimmel?
Yeah, especially if interest rates may go up in the future. The more we move into the capital budget today, the better off we are, and we'll end up saving a fair amount of money. I'm somewhat concerned about, we have a policy of encapsulation when there's an asbestos problem. So I'm not an expert in this, only to the point where my school was shut down for 2 months because of asbestos, and nothing was ever encapsulated. That seems like, it seems like a policy that has some level of risk, which I'm not sure I would support. If you know you have to if you know you have to use tape and a variety of things to ensure that nothing gets into the air, you're going to have to fix it anyway. You're going to, 100%. So maybe we should have some kind of account or some way of dealing with it. Now, I want to hold on here. How long has it been in this condition before it began to wear out? How many years does it last?
I should have said in my remarks, you had a past policy of encapsulation.
Oh, it's awful.
Okay, that's because we were not doing any work to the schools, right?
Yeah.
For some 20 years, basically. So you couldn't remove it. If you did remove it, you'd have to shut down every school and not have a school system in order to do that. So your past policy was encapsulation. Now that we have a facilities master plan, which we did not have historically until 3 years ago, now that we have a facilities master plan, the policy is removal at the time any other work is done in the building.
But does that mean?
So we are not encapsulating any.
No more, well, thank goodness for that. Okay.
And again, the encapsulation goes back about a decade, right? And so again, in the absence of a facilities plan, you're not going to remove, you don't You don't have the capability of doing other work and removing, so you can shut down one building at a time. That was the option that was available here in Norwalk and throughout the state. So most districts are encapsulated in order to meet the law and create a safe environment. But now that we have a facilities master plan, we no longer do that. So we remove it when it's damaged.
Barbara?
Just going back to process, I'm wondering if we could create a process in which the school governance council, in partnership with the principal, who's a member, of course, and chair, can develop sort of their list of things that came up in the facilities over the years so that the committee can review a full, comprehensive, and on-the-ground review of what's happening in our schools and what they see as a problem, because I've only gone through one cycle as a member of the facilities committee, but I'm not seeing that sort of communication of projects kind of come up to the facilities committee once they've already sort of been vetted or discussed somewhere else. And I'd just like to see an overview of what it is that we need to do, what the school community thinks needs to be done,
So you will recall that when we did our facilities master plan, there were, in addition to the new construction recommendations to address capacity, there were priority recommendations made for each school, priorities 1 through 4. In working with the city, the extent of the cost was so vast after the years of not addressing this that we could not get beyond the first and second priorities for each school. So that's what's in the capital budget. Now, if you were to simply ask every SGC to identify their needs, you would be back to this vast amount that could never be accomplished.
Right.
Our next phase really would be to go to the priority 3 and 4 recommendations. You know, if we could get through that in the next, let's say, 10-year period of time, then I think you're at a point of normalcy where you do ask the schools for their recommendations and what they would like to see done. But you know, we're again, talk about catch up. We're at a point
I understand.
Of very significant
I understand all
catch-up
that.
here.
But my point is these things that pop up, like this is something that needs to be addressed because it's not safe because of the asbestos. But we knew about it. The school was reporting it, but it didn't come through facilities. So my question is, could we have some sort of a form or something that each one submits at a certain time of the year and said, this is what's come up in the last 6 months that would be a major project that needs to be reviewed as an emergency?
I would rather see that as the responsibility of our facilities director to report those kinds of instances. Because again, I don't think we're best served by creating a competition among people to see who can get more. There is a science to this. There is an objective, professional way of assessing these needs, and I think that's something that we can do, and we'll do it in the future.
Yeah, I mean, look, things come up, right? But I think we can consider ourselves lucky, considering the multi-million-dollar issues some of our neighboring towns are experiencing right now with their environmental issues. And, you don't want to let something like asbestos in the building run away.
Right.
I know just that one move in Stanford, just moving cost them $2 million. We can't afford to move a school building here. We
don't have anywhere to move.
We need to take care of what we have.
Lowe's.
Okay, well, thank you for all this in-depth discussion. Let's have a vote. All those in favor of this adjusted capital budget?
Is this the amendment?
On the amendment,
We're
sorry.
doing the amendment to then.
The amendment, to be clear, the amendment increases the first year of the 5-year capital budget by $507,000
507?
total.
Okay. Okay, so on the amendment, all in favor? Sarah?
Aye.
Thank you. All in favor on the amendment? Unanimous? 9-0. And now,
Main motion.
motion for the amended motion to be the motion.
The primary motion's already made.
Yep.
so you can
Okay,
take
so
a
we're just
vote.
going to vote on the primary motion as amended. All in favor?
Or discuss if anybody.
Or discussion? I think we've discussed this.
Capital.
Okay, all in favor?
Ah,
All right, there you go.
Sarah?
Aye.
Thank you.
Yay.
Unanimous. Okay, so
By
that
the way,
is the
Mr.
capital
Chairman,
budget. Yes, sir.
Just for the record, you might want to ask Ms. Keys how she would.
Oh, yes, on the operating budget?
Operating budget.
Were you
Yes.
voting in favor of the
I'm
amendment?
voting in favor,
And-
absolutely.
And the principal resolution as amended?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so she did.
Thank you.
So unanimous votes, thank you very much. Now we will go to information and reports. Tom Hamilton, the monthly financial report for December.
Okay, you have before you the December financial report. We're 50% of the way through the fiscal year and 40% of the way through the school year, and we've spent approximately 39% of the budget. I would note that the city charges our health insurance account periodically, and at this point, they have only still reflected the first 1/3 of the expense. So if you true that up to a 50% expenditure rate, that would add $4 million to the number, which would bring it up to a effective expense rate at this point of about 41% overall, which is right where we like to see it at this point during the year. The wage accounts all look to be in good shape. The substitutes, I'd note, are running substantially below last year's level, and we attribute that to the move of the daily substitutes now being in the school budgets, and perhaps some more judicious control over that, as well as the attention that has been paid in the course of the last number of months to absences. So we think we're seeing some positive impact there. In terms of some of the other major accounts that we follow, the 330 account, which is the other professional and technical services, that is primarily special education expenses. As you heard tonight, we have seen some pretty significant reductions, and that's reflected here on page 3, where you see that our year-to-date spending on other professional services is about $1.9 million compared to about $2.6 million at the same time last year. So it's about a 25% reduction in that other professional services line item, and that is running, on budget. We're in good shape in that account. Student transportation, showing that we've spent 70% of the budget, but that is because we receive a prepayment discount for transportation, so we pay a significant portion of that bill early, and so that is running essentially on budget where we expect it to. It's running approximately at the same level as last year. Again, special education on the out-of-district tuition account, the 563 account on page 5, again, reflects the same pattern that we've been talking about all night. Year-to-date expenditures on out-of-district tuition are currently at $2,960,000. Same time last year, it was $3,430,000. So again, about a 14% reduction year over year in out-of-district tuition. We are keeping track of where we are on our utility accounts on page 6, electricity, oil, natural gas, and those accounts are also running where we would expect them to at this point. Electricity is actually running a bit below last year, and so we don't anticipate any problems there. So all in all, really, we're on track to live within our budget for the current year. We don't see any particular areas that are going to present a problem for us.
Thanks, Tom. Slightly off topic, did you explain to Julie the transfers we had? I know that you had a lot going on the last few days, but She had a question about the transfers we voted on earlier.
Ms. Meyer-Mitchell sent me the response.
Oh,
for
Right, I got
questions.
I missed
I had
that.
an email question, and I responded to that, which I guess
Okay,
made it
I just
over
wanna-
to,
I just want to make sure we're good, because we didn't get to discuss it while it was on consent.
Yep,
Next time I'll ask it with everybody, and then we don't have to do the
no problem.
who's on first. Sorry.
Okay,
Thanks, Tom.
that's great, thank you. We will start with committee reports. Why don't we start at this end with Barbara? Committee representative.
Last night, the PTOC met and hosted members of the SGC to invite the superintendent to come and address parents about the goals and hopes and aspirations of the school district in this coming budget cycle. It was a really great meeting with a lot of good input and questions from the parent community, and I think that will help us all to have an easier budget cycle because we'll all understand what's happening and there won't be any surprises. We never like it when there's surprises in May and June, right? So that was good. And that's really all I have to report at the moment.
Bruce?
The curriculum and, Ms. Keys gave me a rather large piece of hard candy, and I have no idea about this report. So I have to admit, I asked her for one. Earlier this evening, the Curriculum and Instruction Committee met. We had interesting discussion. We discussed and approved, sent to the full board, the updated high school program of study, which is interesting because so much has changed in the last couple of years. You know, we have a mindset of thinking we only have two or possibly two high schools. And for years, we had a small high school over in Main Avenue called Briggs, but now we have 4 high schools. And today, we found out that the P-TECH is officially an independent school now. It even has a code number. So with global studies, Norwalk is a city with 4 high schools, 4 real high schools. So you grow in many ways. Okay? It is an interesting discussion. We'll discuss the program of study at a future meeting when we approve it. We had a brief discussion of curriculum development, how it's changed the last couple of years, more inclusive, more staff is involved. We're going to move it forward and make it a more rational approach to it so we can have more people involved in it. We also discussed our advanced placement scores. We discussed Norwalk's, all kinds of AP test scores. We weren't going to discuss it. The bottom line was we do fairly, when it comes to scores of 3 and above, not that bad. The number of students compared to the state who have received at least a 3 on an AP course, percentages are fairly similar. Not bad when it comes to a 4. We're not getting enough 5s. The rigor is not there yet, and we need to, we'll discuss this further because take your AP courses in high school, it's the end of a long process, and you can't really just pin the blame on an 11th grade teacher or a 12th grade teacher. You have to begin to look at it more holistically. So it was the first of, I think, several discussions that we're going to have regarding rigor in our school system, and I appreciated that. That's pretty much it. In terms of our DIRG, Stanford was number 1 when it comes to AP courses. We're right behind. What I found interesting, we were about 14 percentage points ahead of Danbury when it comes to AP scores. So we're doing quite well there.
Thank you, Bruce. Heidi?
You could finish your candy now, Bruce?
Thank you.
Good. Okay. For policy, I think we've spoken enough. There'll be more, obviously, discussions on delayed start times, so I'm fully committed to continuing the committee work on that. In addition, we actually had, during our last meeting, we had a joint meeting with C&I, which is Curriculum and Instruction, and that was really a robust discussion on things we wanted to work on as a policy so we can actually have that implemented or vetted through the Curriculum Instruction Committee. But there's still more work that has to be done. So I believe what we decided is to have Curriculum Instruction take a look at what their needs are and eventually bring it back to policy, make that as a policy, and then have most of our field trips that are 3 days or more go through Curriculum Instruction. So there's still a little bit more work that we will continue to work on. Food charging, we are also able to briefly kind of talk about that at the tail end of our last meeting. So we really have to look at the numbers. That's kind of put on hold for now until we can look at that a little more closely and then bring it back to policy. In addition to that, we're still working on our GPA, so we will continue on that with Norwalk High School and seeing what's happening with NECA. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. CABE, we still need to work on the policies for CABE, so that will be brought back. We still have a lot of work on that as well that we need to complete.
Okay, Heidi, thank you. Mr. Meek.
Yeah, first I'd just like to thank staff and my colleagues for getting yet our budget's passed again this year with 3 hours to spare before the legal deadline. And we'll take a breather for a few minutes. We'll let the city folks digest our budget request, and I know Mr. Barron has to put his full request together over the next few weeks, and we'll try to work with his team with whatever he needs in respect to that, and we look forward to that. I'd say it's a little too early to cast in stone the regularly scheduled February 14th Finance Committee meeting. Will be flexible to the city's needs to do something on a joint basis or whatever is needed as time moves forward here.
Great.
So TBD, but looking forward to it. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
What a way to spend Valentine's.
And it's school break, as we heard from me earlier this evening. As chair of the Facilities Committee, we did have a special meeting on January 7th, just because our regular meeting was on Christmas Eve. And we did the capital budget, but we also looked at a number of projects and the timing. The Ponus Ridge K-8 school is really cruising along, and we've chosen contractors, and ground is going to be broken any day now. So when you consider we had our first meeting about the facilities, the first review of the facilities meeting was about 3 years ago today. And here we are breaking ground. I think it's pretty impressive. So thank you for everyone who's been part of that process, including Bill Hodell, Tom Hamilton, Alan Lowe from the city. It's a lot of hands make light work, as they say, although it really hasn't been light work. But anyway, I'm very happy to say that project's moving along. We're a little further behind on Columbus at Ely, but that also is moving along. And we've made some really great progress. We had a presentation from the architect, the concept of what Jefferson renovated as new could look like. And that will soon be followed by the IB at Chestnut, the elementary IB program. In the old Columbus school. We'll see some schematics and see what that's going to look like. So we had a really productive meeting, and we came a long way. We have been waiting for Brian McMahon for the Yukon Health, their assessment. That report was due in, I think, December 14th or 16th. Anyway, we just got it. Yesterday, I don't think anyone's had a chance to, it's really just a draft, but that is slowly, we're getting that data, and we're going to be able to figure out what we want to do, what we need to do at that building to correct any air quality or any other issues on the environmental side. So at this point, we probably won't have a facilities meeting at the end of January, just because we really have taken care of so many issues, and our next meeting will be in February. I will, you heard from Dr. Kimmel that the State Department of Education did already approve NECA as a separate school, which some people didn't think would happen or would happen that quickly. The school was given an ID, 1030911, and applications were due for NECA. January 11th was their deadline. They got 132 applications for roughly 100 spots. Wow. So they're going to have their first lottery ever. That will be on January 22nd. And they've since received 10 additional applications since the deadline. So I think that school's record is speaking for itself. And there was a legislative breakfast sponsored by CABE, the Connecticut Association of Board of Education, which I attended as chair. Barbara Mitchell-Meyer attended as well. There was sadly not much representation from Norwalk except for Gail Lavielle, but there were a number of other state senators and state representatives, including a new gentleman who was just elected in Greenwich. And several faces we've seen before, Tony Huang from Trumbull, Christine Vahey, is that her name, from Fairfield? So it was, there was a lot of talk, what's going to happen, a lot of changes. The Education Committee in Hartford is all new, new leadership, new faces, and a lot of talk of what could happen, but not a lot of specifics. Mr. Lyons.
The Negotiations Committee has one pending grievance only, but our little respite here where we had all of our contracts signed up and we didn't have to think about them is coming to an end. The ESG, Executive Service Group, contract negotiations and the TEX negotiations will restart at the end of February by state law, which sets certain time periods. Nurses in April, and NFT and NASA in October. So we'll start off with ESG and the TEX next month, and we'll be back to negotiating.
Wow, hard to believe we're back at the table.
Already back.
Ms. Lemieux, I don't know if you're still on, if you want to talk about the Ad Hoc Sped Committee.
She had to drop, her phone ran out of battery.
Oh.
We've been
These things happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we can get an update next month. And Ms. Corbett, anything to report?
I don't have anything specific, really, since both of my committee chairs are here. I do think, to add to Mr. Kimmel's summary of what's going on in curriculum and instruction, another piece that was interesting this evening was that we looked at the enrollment data and the identification data for the new gifted and talented program, and really wanting to dive into that data, making sure that our numbers were starting to get closer to be representative of what our student body demographics actually look like. And so we're not quite there yet, but we're making really impressive gains within a short period of time. And so it was a really encouraging conversation to actually have the data in front of us to see that the student population that is now being identified for gifted and talented is more representative of our student body in Norwalk, and really indicative of the changes that we implemented last year are already starting to show results. And so we look forward to seeing that continued growth in the future.
Terrific. Okay, and we'll do board member announcements. We can start with you and work our way back.
Nothing at this time.
Okay.
Nada.
No, Sarah's not with us. I don't think I have anything. Brian?
Nothing.
No?
Nope.
For anyone who's not aware that, Dr. Levinson, president of NCC, he's officially retiring at the end of this academic year. He's going to stay. He's a great guy. He's going to stay on to advise the new person in that position. So he's worked with the city on a variety of things for a long time now, and I hope he continues to work with us. But we're going to miss him.
I bet. Okay, Barbara.
I just want to make sure that people know about the events scheduled for MLK Day on Monday, January 21st, from 10 a.m. to 12 noon at Calvary Baptist Church. And there will be a community breakfast at 8, with tickets for $15 apiece, which supports the Norwalk Housing Authority Scholarship Program. There's also a citywide program January 21st at 7 in the City Hall here in the concert hall. That's it.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We have the approval of the minutes from the December 18th, 2018 meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Brian Meek. Second.
Discussion.
Heidi, discussion or corrections?
I attended the meeting, and I'm not on the attendance list, and I'm not certain that Eric did attend it, and he is on the attendance list, and
I don't recall.
so we might need to move to table till he's here and we can ask him.
Or didn't
He wasn't. She
he
said he
vote
wasn't.
on something?
I thought he came to,
He came to curriculum, came
and then
in,
left.
dropped a folder off, actually with me, and then I think he had to leave.
say, so I
So,
think.
and I think the minute taker here is saying he wasn't there.
Excellent. Okay, so that needs to be amended. And then on page 7, I apologize because now I have to scroll down to page 7. You have PTA, and the handbook is for procedures regarding permitting, facilities, and best practices of finance and governance. essentially, is, I think, distilling what I said.
Okay. Okay, the corrections, making the corrections as provided. All in favor? Unanimously approved by the 7 members that are still here. And now we're going to go into executive session. Let's take a 5-minute break. It is